Hi guys, if you remember me from last time, I was rambling in my room about something to do with the technology of the First World War. But anyway, today let's go through some notes. We've prepared some official notes this time, so you guys can just follow along on the screen or just listen to me ramble and open up a new tab or something. So today we are going to talk about the causes of the outbreak of the First World War, remaining with the First World War because it's close to my heart. So yeah, let's begin. So World War One, as we know, is the Great War. It's very bloody and it's romanticized, but it's known as a kind of a useless war because it was mostly fought due to imperial power, greed, and those old Victorian mindsets of fighting for king and country or something like that. So let's look at the notes and let's go back all the way to the 1870s approx first. So at the time, Germany's unification transformed the balance of power in Europe because Germany became extremely powerful. With the British Empire controlling everything and the other empires wanting to expand their own power and whatnot, Germany decided they needed to join the other people. So they rapidly industrialized and they made themselves very, very industrially and economically significant on the European continent. Germany was more powerful than the US at the time, let's put it this way. So unfortunately, a very powerful Germany was not really accepted because Germany and France had a very crappy relationship because they fought the Franco-Prussian War and France lost. So the French wanted Alsace-Lorraine back because the Germans took it, but yeah. So relationships were not that good in the beginning. So the alliance system was a key factor in why war broke out because, let's quote Blackadder for a bit. Blackadder said, I think in the final episode or second final episode of Blackadder goes forth that the strategy was to have two big blocks on each side, two collections of big powers on each side, and the aim was to be each other's deterrent. Unfortunately, to quote Blackadder, it was complete bollocks because it just doesn't work. You see a growing threat, you build up your own side, and the other side sees you're building up your own side, and it just escalates. Thus the arms race and all that empire grabbing in Africa and all around the world. And of course you have a lot of guns as well. And France was kind of isolated because Germany was growing powerful and everybody else wasn't really too keen on going with France at the time, given that just 60 years before everybody fought against France in the Peninsular Wars and Napoleonic era. But anyway, moving away from France, let's go back to Germany. Bismarck, the very, very, very sneaky guy, he signed a series of defensive military alliances. So his aim was to isolate France. For example, dual alliance of Austria-Hungary, the Three Emperors Alliance of Austria-Hungary, and Triple Alliance of Italy and Austria-Hungary. If you look at the maps, you will see it's quite geographically and politically significant because it sort of pushed France into one corner. So, unfortunately, Bismarck found it increasingly difficult to keep Russia and Austria-Hungary together because there was trouble in the Balkans. And as we know, the Balkans was a very significant cause and setting for the July crisis, and because Archduke got shot by Gavrilo Princip. But anyway, Russo-German relations were kind of under strain because, well, Bismarck was trying to make Germany great, but Kaiser Wilhelm is known for being just an immature child. He had a withered arm, he wanted to prove he was strong, but his extremely nationalistic ideals and methodology caused him to kind of break away from Bismarck, and of course this pissed everybody off in the German chancellery. So yeah, Kaiser Wilhelm, I was thinking about this last night. Kaiser Wilhelm is a little bit. He's a bit of a dick, let's put it this way. Anyway, so over time, with all the relations growing here and out of Europe, it's here over. You see, Britain, France, and Russia drifted together. Then Britain kind of drifted together with Russia after 1904, 1905, after the Russo-Japanese War, because Britain was kind of still grabbing everything at the time, and the Russians were a big threat to them. But anyway, the main premise is that everybody drifted together. France, Russia, and the UK drifted to one side and formed their own triple alliance, the Entente, and the Germans, the Italians, well, not the Italians at the time, but the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and some of the people in the European states, they just drifted together and formed their own party. So, as referring back to what I mentioned before, we know that the building up of two great powers, as we see here, it's generating alarm because of aggressive imperialism and naval expansion. Oh, bollocks, what did I press? Kaiser Wilhelm wanted to make Germany great, but unfortunately he was rather aggressive in his policies, as he aptly termed it, Weltpolitik, world politics, as opposed to Bismarck's real politics. So it's an idealistic emperor bent on making Germany extremely great, coupled with the old Victorian ancient great powers that kind of pushed everybody closer to conflict and tension and diplomatic crises. So a key thing to remember is these 2 points at the time that raised the tension between probably the 1890s to the just before World War One. These two: colonies, imperialism, and social Darwinism. Empire was great, hence Germany's desire to be empire. Britain had the biggest empire in the world, governing a quarter of the people on the planet. Who doesn't want to have that kind of money and power and control over trade routes? Social Darwinism, where everybody believes that your own country is great, everybody else's is rubbish. We must make everybody great, and military and flags and bunting and all that kind of stuff. It's extreme nationalism at its finest. And of course, imperialism, where you impose your own rule over other people, and the other people don't get to choose their own sovereignty, and they get to be controlled by you, and you exploit the resources. It was extremely popular to see who had the biggest toys and who had the most money at the time. And not everybody wanted Germany to have the best, because given that German industrial power and economy was rising greatly, Britain controlled the waves. Germany would then be able to control Europe, given Germany's rising prestige in the society of powers. So, growing tensions, as we can see here, and the various sort of, we call mini crises before the July crisis, such as here Weltpolitik and the Moroccan crisis, showed tensions between empires could be diplomatically stressful to sort out. Now that the various empires have gained the prestige, power, and money, and firepower, and whatever, they would always want to say that they are right when faced with the situation. The Moroccan crisis, where the Germans tried to display their own power and claim something, and the Brits and the French were not exactly happy. So it shows how dangerous when big powers clash together. Luckily it didn't break out into war at the time, but it was extremely tricky to sort out. And naval power is another key important thing, because these points here. Airplanes weren't even invented in the 1890s. Well, prototypes were, whatever. Anyway, air power was not significant at the time. What determined how powerful and how successful you were was the size of your navy. My beloved Royal Navy. The British Royal Navy had the policy of being bigger than the next two navies combined, so thus it had monopoly over every single trade route and every single basically area of every single sea in the entire world, barring the Americas. So of course, Germany wanted a great navy. As we can see here, the Reichstag passed naval laws. Tirpitz, Admiral Tirpitz, not the battleship Tirpitz of World War II fame, sister ship of Bismarck. The Germans proceeded with a very aggressive naval policy, And so 3 battleships to be built every year for the next 20 years. That means you would have 60 battleships. Well, the Brits had a huge lead though, because the Brits had lots. By the end of the 1890s, so many, like King Edward's, Canopus class, Majestic class pre-dreadnoughts. They had a lot of battleships because the Royal Navy's duty at the time was to police was to protect trade routes and display British power around the world, whereas the army was tasked with garrisoning and policing the empire itself on land. So the determining factor of whether an empire was great or not was based on its navy. And given that Britain had pretty well built and very powerful ships, it was not surprising that the Germans were facing a very difficult task in order to build up a navy that would be on par with the UK. Then, unfortunately, Dreadnought happened. If you remember what I was talking about in my last video, HMS Dreadnought, hurrah! And I apologize for my last video, it's not 9 inches of belt armor, 11 inches of belt armor. The Dreadnought was very legendary. If you check out my last video if you want to understand how revolutionary it is. So the fact that upon building it, upon completion, every other ship in the world was rendered obsolete because it was a completely new type. Think of it as the older white MacBooks, and then suddenly somebody builds a Retina display MacBook Pro. Instantly every single computer before it is rendered obsolete. So the Germans copied it with the Nassau class, SMS Nassau, also a very nice battleship. I have a fondness for battleships myself. Sorry. So Germany had to switch production and decided to copy the UK, and thus the 1906 the arms race, the naval arms race. It was kind of ironic because they built up so many ships that they only clashed at one single point. And by the time the ships that were legendary and were built at the time were already very obsolete, and they were super dreadnoughts, as I've explained in my last video, and various other things. So as we can see, everything is starting to spiral out of control. You can think of it as sort of like the pre-Cold War. Then again, every war is kind of similar in a way. 2 big blocks building up different armaments and powers, and then everybody goes to tension and war, and this becomes extremely agitated. So let's go. Here we go. Luckily, in 1912, the Germans decided to build up their army, and because they did a pretty good job in building the dreadnoughts. Because let's face it, when you have a very, very powerful industrial country gearing like 50% of its production to building its navy, you can afford to take a rest. Anyway, so moving on, we have the Entente Cordiale. Yep. Basically, within this period, more treaties were signed, and it was the further strengthening and building of the 2 different sides, the Entente and the later Axis, the Central Powers, my bad. The treaties would make each power very connected, and they would make them so strong that when one power would go to war, the others would have to follow. And this was kind of very deadly, because that means, as we learned from the First World War, when Germany gave its blank check agreement to Austria-Hungary, and then the Germans were dragged in, and the French were dragged in, and the Russians were dragged in, and everything went to the toilet. And it went to toilet the First World War went to toilet so fast because of the Schlieffen Plan. Originally, it was Count Schlieffen. It was a kind of a tactical exercise, it was a practice. But then actually someone took it seriously and actually thought, hey, wait a minute, this is actually viable. And the Schlieffen Plan was born. It was a tactical exercise that got modified several times and actually became a very effective method of invasion and just pounding the French. So yeah, they would go through Belgium in the end. Moltke class battle cruisers. Yes. The Germans would go through Belgium, and as we know, Belgium is neutral and a friend of the UK, so that brought the United Kingdom into the war when Belgium just got steamrolled by Germany, which was not a good thing. And if we go to the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire was in decline, the Slavs were rebelling, the Balkans were in trouble because the Russians thought they were defenders of the Slavs because they are a Slav country, but the Ottoman Empire, which was quite powerful from the 13th century all the way up to 1919, the Ottoman Empire just imposed its own rule on every other place. Of course, the Slavs didn't want to be ruled by another tribe that was different from them entirely. Like the Ottomans were mostly Muslims and Arabs. Oh, not Arabs, sorry, but like the sultans and all that. The Slavs wanted their own movement, they wanted their own governance, they wanted their own sovereignty. As we can see, the Pan-Slav movement, why do I keep doing that? Remove highlight. The national interests of a race of people contributing to rising anti-Ottoman sentiment and rebellion in the Balkans, with the Russians wanting a warm water port in the Dardanelles, and the Russian Navy was bad. We learned from Tsushima in 1904-1905 that they needed to modernize. Russia wanted to expand, it wanted to build up, given that tensions are building and Germany's kind of threatening war on everybody. There is economic and political interests, so the Middle East became a melting pot of tension. And as we can see here, the free notes are available for download. I'm just explaining to you guys and just bringing you through the thought concepts and how we can just go through a mental flow of things. We see here that the Austro-Hungarians, they are quite linked to Germany, given that especially the Austria bit, they speak the same language. It's a dual monarchy. They both control, but then the Austrians kind of became the dominant power and just pushed the Hungarians off. And here we come to the crises. Assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, and the relations between Serbia and Austria-Hungary have been strained, given that both wanted to, create their own destiny. And then the military allies who were drawn into the conflict because of, for example, Germany's blank check agreement and the various different alliances that Bismarck set up before, and the various treaties that were signed in the pre-war years that strengthened the ties between each power and each bloc, between the Entente and the Central Powers. That led to a whole mess of a chain reaction that dragged everybody into the war, because they signed a mutual defense agreement, but they felt it was proper to uphold, and there was no backing out from it. So basically within the period of like 3 months, all of Europe was at war, which was kind of impressive given the scale of how many troops were mobilized. As we can see, the general mobilization of Russia and Austria-Hungary, and it's kind of sad thing, because the conscript armies of the European powers and Russia had to be mobilized because they were fighting for their own respective country. And because they were conscripts, it just made it even more sad. They had to fulfill national service, but they didn't necessarily want to fight. Nobody wants to fight a big bloody war. Very few Londoners were forward thinking at the time and thought that the war would be kind of bloody and all that. Everybody was for king and country, for glory, for honor, for your own country. It was very, how should we say, it was extremely, it's sad because you just want to believe in your own social Darwinistic, nationalistic ideals and just kind of screw everybody over. And the Lost Generation, just really damaged Europe, and it destroyed the old powers. As we can see, with industrial warfare starting to come into hand, modern warfare being born, the old ancient powers, the empires, were all starting to crumble. Britain ended the war still with the biggest empire, but very soon it started to crumble. So, as we can see, honor, guarantee of neutrality, declare war on Germany. The Germans believed that Britain's small professional army would be of no significance to prevent the Schlieffen Plan, but they did. They managed to delay because they went so fast. We just see the scale of how do I put this? New tactics with new forward-thinking tacticians, but having to rely on oldish tactics, but new weaponry coupled with rising tensions and political diplomacy failure, and all the firepower and expansion, and the fact that each side was not willing to give up, and for the silly ideal of honor for your own country, honor for what, for glory, it will be an adventure. It's just very sad. But anyway, I've rambled on a bit too much. Hopefully you can follow, you followed along, and then I kind of appreciated my not appreciate, that's too high and mighty, just enjoyed my just general explanation and talking of this particular note, the causes of the outbreak of World War One. Next, a bit later, I'll be talking about the I think it's the course of the war. I don't remember. I've made some notes somewhere, but we'll be also doing the same format of notes and whatnot. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and please subscribe for more notes, and free notes. As I said, free notes in the description below for download. I think so. At least boss says so. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.